That New York Times story about the 30-year-old man in San Antonio who died from COVID-19 after attending a COVID-19 party, believing that COVID-19 was a hoax, whose dying utterance, according to Dr. Jane Appleby at Methodist Hospital in San Antonio, was, quote, "I think I made a mistake. I thought this was a hoax, but it's not," unquote.
Yeah, I heard her say that on NBC Nightly News.
Well, Michael Brendan Doherty over at National Review did the journalism the New York Times is loath to do. I mean, you, of course, understand the power of that story. Young person, red state, believed it was a hoax, failed to socially distance, and he's dead.
And he's in a state there's no mask requirements at that time.
And so the point is, look, this is, this what happened to this 30-year-old, it's the Melinda Gates position. If it's happening in Cheyenne, or if it's happening in New York City, it could just as easily happen in Cheyenne, Wyoming. We could have just as many problems. One person has COVID, every person has COVID. The 30-year-old is just as susceptible as the 80-year-old with 7 comorbidities. Okay. It's a morality tale, and that's what the media is spinning. But he notes if you click on the article link now, you'll find new paragraphs of hedging that has been added to this story. The New York Times could not independently verify Dr. Appleby's account. On Monday, the San Antonio Health Department said its contact tracers did not have any information that would confirm or deny that such an event had happened there. In recent days, as the video of Appleby describing the case along with the press statement was distributed, she did not say when or where the party took place, how many people attended, how long afterward the man was hospitalized with COVID-19. She said she was sharing the story to warn others where cases are surging.
Yeah, and I think she liked the publicity too. No offense, but she was everywhere.
There's
But what is that?
There's also an additional paragraph saying that the New York Times tried several times through the hospital to contact the deceased man's family to no avail. You might also note the story now, an entirely different subheadline. Health experts have been skeptical that such parties occur, and details of this case could not be independently confirmed. The story has been transformed from one man who died by taking a foolish risk in which the doctor was the only source to a story about the questionable claim the doctor is making.
Well, and he's a 30-year-old. I thought there was like teens and 20-year-olds going to COVID parties, allegedly.
This is an example we've talked about any number of times, as was declared right after Trump's election, that they're in the business, the New York Times, Barry Weiss's resignation letter said as much. They're in the business of telling a story that they want to be true regardless of the truth. And then you get this, MSNBC. After a Trump flack was on to describe the safety protocols at the Trump rally in Tulsa, talking about temperature checks and so on and so forth. And by the way, we reported on this National Bureau of Economic Research study led by a San Diego State academic finds no evidence of any heightened transmission as a result of that Trump rally in Tulsa. But Trump is spreading the virus by having a rally, and tens of thousands of protesters on the streets of America's cities are not. Got it. Okay.
Or even the protesters that were outside of the Tulsa arena where he had his rally.
And then this kicker from Chuck Todd after the Trump spokesman had gotten done explaining what they did in Tulsa. This will live in infamy.
And just a reminder, for what it's worth, there is no editorial point of view here on any of these newscasts on MSNBC in the daytime.
Russ Ipsiloquitur.
And also, real quick, New York Times, 0 faculty were sick from COVID. But they went after him because he did something different and novel and decided to keep school in session.
And because it's Faywell and Liberty University.
Right.
Michael Barone, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and author of How America's Political Parties Change and How They Don't, joins us now. Michael, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Chuck Todd says, just for the record, so you know, Michael, MSNBC's daytime lineup has no editorial point of view.
Yeah, I did. Now that was that first appeared in The Onion, isn't that right? Or the Babylon Bee?
I don't know.
No,
Did Chuck Todd switch his jobs? Is he working for The Onion now? I'm not sure. He might as well be.
Yeah, well, there's sort of been a merger of The Onion and the New York Times
Yeah.
going on recently. And the Washington Post. I mean, I had a column in the Washington Examiner talking about what Britt Hume stated, has been covering news for more than 50 years, said, I don't think I've ever seen such dishonest and biased coverage of any event. And the event, of course, was Donald Trump's speech at Mount Rushmore on what CNN characterized as, quote, independence, unquote, day.
Really?
Yeah, well, no, I know.
Oh,
1619 is the founding of the country. Right, I got it.
The 1690, yeah, we declared independence only to protect our slave-holding economic interests or something like that, as the New York Times has instructed us in the 1619 Project, which, by the way, was slam-bang criticized by a lot of very liberal-minded historians, including some I know, James McPherson, the great Civil War historian based at Princeton, Gordon Wood, the great historian of founding fathers,
And a socialist.
retired from
Yeah.
Brown, and so forth. I don't know if he's a socialist or not, but Sean Wilentz, big partisan Democrat, and also a good historian based at Princeton. Those are serious scholars. The New York Times is kind of a propaganda sheet full of, as we believe, Barry Weiss's resignation letter addressed to the 39-year-old publisher A.G. Sulzberger. It really is sort of mean girls, junior high school mentality of people accusing her of being a Nazi and, you're talking about the Jews again, and so forth, on an internal website that apparently includes participation by masthead, that is, executives of the newspaper, in it, so they're not blind to this. This is pretty foul stuff, and if I was advising the people at The Onion, I would call off their merger with the New York Times because that's going to hurt their credibility.
What if you were advising the President of the United States? What would you be saying he needs to be doing in this moment? Because as good as his Mount Rushmore speech is, and as much lunacy as you're getting from the far left and then the ultra far left, which is where the fight is right now in the Democrat Socialist Party, he still seems to be flailing.
Well, I think one of the things I'd advise him long ago was stop tweeting every time you have a momentary thought and so forth. Do the old equivalent. I used to, think about I'm going to write an angry letter because some company has treated me badly or something like that. I'd write the angry letter and then I'd put it in the top left-hand drawer of my desk for at least 24 hours before I sent it out. I don't know why we can't get an equivalent of that on Mr. Trump's Twitter feed, because after he gave that really quite splendid speech at Mount Rushmore, in which, contrary to what your Illinois U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth said, she said he was talking about traitors all the time, the Confederates and so forth. There was no mention of Confederates there at all. He celebrated U.S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, abolitionist heroes, the abolition of slavery, and in the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Perhaps Senator Duckworth thinks that the Battle Hymn of the Republic was a Confederate marching song. She ought to take her little time and read a little of James McPherson or other Civil War historians. That was the theme of the Union soldiers and of people that wanted to abolish slavery. So, and then Trump tweets 2 days later something about NASCAR, which could lead to suggest that he liked the idea of the Confederate stars and bars on NASCAR cars. can the tweets of that nature
Well, he also
show more discipline?
Yeah, he showed he told Catherine Herridge from CBS News the other night that the Confederate flag is a freedom of speech. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I suppose you could say that, but why would you?
Right.
Uh,
That's the point. That's
know,
the point.
yeah, that's yeah. His unwillingness to admit error and so forth, his sort of participation in honor culture, that's appealing. That was appealing to many voters in 2016. It's still appealing to a lot of people. I think that it's become counterproductive to his political strings. Of course, he might say to me, gee, did you predict that I'd win in 2016? And he might go on to say, Michael, how many times have you been elected president of the United States?
Yeah, but right. But here's the thing. I mean, this, right. That's the catch-all response. But it's not discipline. We talk about discipline. It's just this. You almost appeal to his self-interest, Mr. President. Talk about the things you want to talk about. Don't let them get you talking about the things they want you to talk about. How complicated is that? This is an appeal to his ego. Don't let them get you talking about the topics that interest them. You talk about the topics that interest you and the American people. It's that simple.
Well, if you go back and look at successful presidents who were successfully reelected, President Eisenhower in the 1950s, President Reagan in the 1980s, both Republicans. Both actually, Reagan had started off as a Democrat. Many people thought Eisenhower was a Republican when he was military, or a Democrat when he was a military officer. In any case, they rationed what they said pretty carefully, and occasionally made some statements they later regretted. But they imposed a certain discipline, and I think with Mr. Trump, you're getting less discipline as time goes on rather than more. And so forth. Just as Senator Duckworth should not have said that Trump spent all his time talking about dead traitors, so Trump should not feel compelled to tell us what his opinion of NASCAR logos is, and so forth. I mean, do we really want to know what the president's response is to every one of these things? Earlier when he was getting good marks for handling COVID-19 in a variety of ways, he plows into that and he resurrects a story about a employee of Joe Scarborough, the MSNBC morning host, when he was a congressman, and one of his staffers tragically died, was perhaps murdered, and he brings this up. Mr. President, Joe Scarborough is not somebody you should be writing about or trying to embarrass. Joe Scarborough is capable of embarrassing himself. He's small potatoes.
Yeah.
Get over being so, picky-unish concerned about people who were really not worth your time. Ronald Reagan did not spend a lot of time attacking the Joe Scarboroughs of his day.
Right.
What's your handle on Senate Republicans in particular? And of course, the reporting is that with Trump's poll numbers not as strong as they once were at present, that there is more dissension in the ranks and more breaking of ranks. And is that a real thing? And is that a real problem that the president needs to address intra-party as well?
Sure, it's a problem, and it's it's an increasing problem. And when the president's poll numbers go down, a lot of members of his party, his power goes down in some more or less measurable sort of way. This has been true. What's interesting is other presidents who were reelected have seen their numbers going down a whole lot more than that. Ronald Reagan's 2 years after his inauguration had terrible numbers, much lower than Mr. Trump has now. George W. Bush had terrible numbers, mediocre numbers in the first 8 months of his presidency, and very bad numbers in the last 2 years, and nonetheless was able to achieve policy successes like the successful surge strategy in Iraq. you're going to see people hightail it out and try and, go out on their own naturally when that happens. One of the things that I think should alarm Republicans right now is second quarter fundraising for Senate and key Senate races has got Democrats out raising Republicans by something that looks nearly like 2-1. That's even greater than the usual advantage that Democrats have had in fundraising for Senate races. It's been a factor for some period of time, but it shows a significant problem there, and it would be a lot easier for them to win if the president is getting 46, 48, 50% of the vote than it is if he's getting 40, 42, 38.
He is Michael Barone, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner, resident fellow at AEI, and author of How America's Political Parties Change and How They Don't. Michael, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good to be with you in Chicagoland.
Thank
Say
you.
hi to Senator Duckworth the next
Oh,
time
yes,
you have
we
her on.
sure. Yeah, like she
Yeah,
comes
Dan-
on this show. Yeah, right. That's funny.
Dan has her on speed dial. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.